Claire Bennett spent most of her life learning how wealthy men destroyed people politely, not with weapons, not with violence, with signatures, with contracts, with smiling conversations that slowly stripped families apart until nothing remained except debt and humiliation hidden behind expensive suits. By 27, Claire understood that lesson better than anyone. The Bennett family once carried influence across Manhattan's financial circles. Her father built Bennett Holdings from almost nothing, transforming a small logistics company into a respected transportation empire connected to elite corporate clients across the East Coast. Then everything collapsed. Federal investigations accused Richard Bennett of financial fraud 3 years earlier. News stations destroyed his reputation within days, while investors abandoned the company immediately afterward. Before the investigation even officially ended, Richard Bennett died in what authorities labeled a suicide inside his office apartment overlooking Lower Manhattan. Claire never believed the story completely. Her father feared many things: failure, public shame, losing his family, but not death. Something about the investigation always felt wrong to her, especially because several financial records connected to the case mysteriously vanished afterward. Now the Bennett family survived on the edge of bankruptcy, while creditors circled constantly like predators sensing weakness. Claire's mother rarely left their apartment anymore after tabloids publicly blamed Richard Bennett for ruining dozens of wealthy investors. Every month brought new lawsuits, new humiliation, new pressure, and Claire carried all of it alone. She secretly managed what remained of Bennett Holdings during the day, while working private consulting contracts at night, just to prevent the company from collapsing entirely. Powerful investment firms repeatedly offered to save the business in exchange for ownership control, but Claire refused every time, because she understood the truth hidden beneath their offers. They did not want to help her. They wanted the final remains of her father's empire after public scandal weakened the family enough to steal it cheaply. That determination eventually brought her to the Blackwell Foundation Charity Gala. The invitation itself felt strange. Exclusive Manhattan events rarely welcome financially damaged families anymore. Yet somehow Claire received personal access to one of the most elite charity galas in New York, an event attended by senators, billionaires, judges, celebrity investors, and international business leaders powerful enough to reshape economies through private conversations alone. Claire suspected opportunity. She should have suspected danger instead. The Blackwell Grand Hotel towered above Midtown Manhattan, beneath cold autumn rain, the night of the gala. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance, while armed private security monitored guests beneath glowing chandeliers visible through massive ballroom windows. Everything looked elegant, but Claire noticed tension immediately after entering. The atmosphere inside the ballroom felt wrong. People smiled too carefully. Powerful men whispered behind champagne glasses, while security teams communicated constantly through hidden earpieces along the walls. Several guests looked nervous. Others looked terrified. Claire moved carefully through the ballroom, wearing a silver evening gown purchased months earlier for meetings that never happened. The dress looked elegant enough to belong among Manhattan's elite, but emotionally she still felt like an outsider surrounded by predators pretending to be civilized. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while an orchestra played softly near the ballroom balcony overlooking the city skyline. For a brief moment, Claire allowed herself hope. Maybe tonight could save Bennett Holdings. Maybe one investor would finally believe her company deserved another chance. That hope disappeared the second the ballroom suddenly fell silent. The reaction happened instantly. Conversation stopped. Politicians straightened nervously. Security teams repositioned themselves automatically near exits. Claire turned slowly toward the entrance and saw Leonardo Moretti. Every terrifying rumor surrounding him suddenly made sense. Leonardo entered the ballroom wearing a perfectly tailored black suit untouched by rain despite the storm outside. He moved through the crowd calmly, but the room reacted to him like prey sensing a predator nearby. Judges avoided eye contact. Billionaires stepped aside instinctively. Even armed security personnel looked uneasy. Publicly, Leonardo Moretti was one of New York's most respected businessmen. Real estate empires, international investments, philanthropic foundations, political influence reaching across multiple states. Unofficially, he controlled one of the most feared criminal organizations on the East Coast. Claire studied him carefully from across the ballroom. Leonardo looked younger than she expected, early 30s perhaps. Cold gray eyes, sharp features, the kind of controlled calm that usually belonged to dangerous men capable of violence without emotional hesitation. Everything about him radiated discipline, power, and something darker hidden beneath both. Claire immediately looked away. Men like Leonardo Moretti destroyed lives accidentally while protecting their own interests. She wanted absolutely nothing connected to him. Unfortunately, Leonardo noticed her anyway. Claire realized at the moment his attention shifted across the ballroom directly toward her. The reaction felt immediate and deeply unsettling, because he didn't look surprised to see her. He looked like someone confirming something he already expected. Fear tightened slowly inside her chest. Then Leonardo started walking toward her. Every conversation nearby faded instantly as powerful guests noticed his movement. Several politicians exchanged nervous glances, while one older investor quietly left the ballroom entirely. Claire remained still despite every instinct telling her to leave. Running would show fear, and Claire Bennett spent too many years surviving humiliation to appear weak now. Leonardo stopped directly in front of her. Up close, his presence felt even more intimidating. Not loud, not aggressive, controlled. The kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because everyone already feared disappointing him. His gaze studied her carefully for several seconds. Claire refused to lower her eyes. That seemed to interest him unexpectedly. Without warning, Leonardo placed one hand firmly against her waist and pulled her slightly closer beside him. The ballroom froze. Shock spread visibly through the crowd. Claire's pulse accelerated instantly. "What are you doing?" she whispered sharply. Leonardo ignored the question completely. Instead, he looked toward the surrounding guests calmly, then publicly declared the words that changed Claire's life forever. "Claire Bennett is under my protection now." Silence swallowed the ballroom. Absolute silence. Several people visibly panicked. One senator nearly dropped his drink. Across the room, a dark-haired man near the balcony stiffened violently before signaling something toward nearby security personnel. Claire's heart pounded painfully. She tried stepping away from Leonardo, but his grip against her waist tightened slightly, not enough to hurt her, but enough to stop escape. Fear collided with confusion instantly. Why her? Why publicly claim her in front of half the city's elite power structure? And why did several people suddenly look terrified for her survival? Claire forced herself to speak calmly. "You don't owe me." For the first time, emotion flickered briefly across Leonardo's face. Interest, not anger. Interest. Most women around men like him probably submitted immediately. Claire refused. That intrigued him more than obedience ever could. Before either could speak again, gunfire exploded across the ballroom. Screams erupted instantly. Glass shattered. Guests dropped beneath tables, while armed men burst through the northern entrance firing automatic weapons toward Leonardo's security teams. Chaos consumed everything within seconds. Claire barely processed movement before Leonardo pulled her violently behind a marble pillar as bullets tore through crystal chandeliers overhead. The orchestra stopped abruptly. Blood splattered across white tablecloths nearby. Private security teams returned fire immediately while panicked guests scrambled toward exits collapsing into each other beneath smoke and shattered glass. Claire's survival instincts took over instantly. Years of emotional pressure hardened her faster than fear expected. She stayed low beside Leonardo, while more gunfire erupted across the ballroom. "You brought me into this?" she demanded breathlessly. Leonardo remained eerily calm despite the violence surrounding them. "No," he answered coldly while reloading a concealed handgun. "You were already in it." The statement terrified her more than the shooting itself, because it sounded truthful. Nearby, one of Leonardo's guards collapsed after taking a bullet through the throat. Another attacker moved toward their position before Marcus Vale. Leonardo's head of security shot him twice across the ballroom staircase. Everything felt unreal. Politicians hiding beneath tables. Billionaires bleeding across marble floors. Criminal warfare exploding inside a charity gala, designed for public appearances and polite lies. Claire realized something horrifying then. The people in this room were not separated into good and evil. Many of them were connected. Corruption tied them together invisibly beneath wealth and public respectability. And somehow, she had just become part of it. Leonardo suddenly grabbed her wrist. "We're leaving." Before Claire could protest, security teams surrounded them while escorting both rapidly through emergency corridors behind the ballroom kitchens. More gunfire echoed behind them. Someone screamed. Smoke alarms activated overhead. Claire stumbled slightly in high heels while Leonardo kept pulling her forward through narrow service hallways toward underground parking access. Even during chaos, his control never broke. That frightened her deeply, because men capable of staying calm during violence usually cause it regularly. Outside, armored SUVs waited beneath the underground exit ramp, while security personnel exchanged gunfire with attackers near the parking entrance. Marcus forced Claire into the back seat beside Leonardo seconds before the convoy accelerated violently into Manhattan traffic beneath heavy rain. Only then did silence finally settle inside the vehicle. Claire struggled to breathe normally. Her entire body trembled from adrenaline, while distant sirens echoed through the city outside. Leonardo remained beside her, watching the rain silently. Calm again, as if surviving assassination attempts belonged to his normal routine. Claire stared at him in disbelief. "You publicly declare me yours in front of criminals and politicians," she said shakily. "And now people are trying to kill us." Leonardo finally looked toward her. Cold gray eyes met hers steadily. "Not us," he corrected quietly. The answer chilled her completely, because suddenly Claire understood the terrifying possibility that tonight's attack may not have targeted Leonardo alone. Then she noticed blood slowly running down his wrist onto the black leather seat beneath his hand, and realized the most feared Mafia boss in New York had been shot protecting her. Rain hammered against the armored convoy as it disappeared from Manhattan's glowing skyline and entered the isolated northern highways beyond the city. Claire Bennett sat silently in the back seat beside Leonardo Moretti, while tension suffocated the space between them. The scent of gunpowder and blood still lingered inside the vehicle after the massacre at the gala, making everything feel unreal. Leonardo's injured wrist remained wrapped tightly in black fabric by one of the security medics, though blood still slowly stained the bandages beneath his cuff. He barely reacted to the pain. That disturbed Claire more than the shooting itself. Most men panicked after surviving assassination attempts. Leonardo looked emotionally untouched by violence. Outside the tinted windows, civilization gradually disappeared behind endless forests and private roads guarded by armed checkpoints. Every few miles, additional security vehicles joined the convoy until Claire realized they were entering territory controlled entirely by Leonardo's organization. Not a home, a fortress. Fear settled heavily inside her chest again. She still did not understand why he publicly declared her under his protection. More importantly, she did not understand why powerful people immediately tried killing them afterward. Questions crowded her thoughts constantly. But Leonardo remained silent the entire drive, emotionally distant, controlled, like a man already calculating 10 different wars simultaneously inside his head. Nearly 2 hours later, the convoy finally approached enormous iron gates surrounded by stone walls and heavily armed guards. Surveillance cameras rotated across the property while floodlights illuminated dense forests surrounding the estate. The mansion itself emerged slowly through heavy rain. Massive, beautiful, and deeply unsettling. Dark stone architecture towered above the isolated property like something built less for comfort and more for intimidation. Gothic pillars framed enormous glass windows, while modern security systems blended invisibly into the structure's elegant exterior. The estate looked like a billionaire's dream, but Claire immediately sensed something colder hidden beneath the luxury. Too much silence, too much security, too many locked doors. As the convoy stopped beneath the entrance archway, armed guards positioned themselves automatically around Leonardo's vehicle before the doors even opened. Claire noticed how every employee avoided direct eye contact with him. Fear followed Leonardo everywhere naturally, not respect. Fear. The front doors opened before they reached them. Several staff members stood waiting silently inside the marble entrance hall, while a tall man in a charcoal suit approached Leonardo immediately. Marcus Vale. Claire recognized him from a ballroom shooting. Up close, Marcus looked less like private security and more like someone trained specifically for war. Broad shoulders, scar along his jawline, emotionless eyes constantly scanning every movement nearby. Perimeter secure, Marcus informed Leonardo calmly. 2 checkpoints increased. Nobody enters without clearance. Leonardo nodded once before finally looking toward Claire again. You'll stay here temporarily. Temporarily. The word sounded polite enough to hide the reality underneath it. Claire crossed her arms tightly. Do I have a choice? For a brief second, something unreadable moved behind Leonardo's cold expression. Not if you want to survive. The honesty irritated her more than manipulation would have, because part of her believed him. Leonardo turned toward one of the female staff members. Prepare the east wing. The woman nodded nervously before quickly leading Claire upstairs through massive hallways lined with expensive artwork and antique chandeliers. The deeper Claire entered the mansion, the stranger the atmosphere became. Luxury surrounded everything, but warmth existed nowhere. Every hallway felt too quiet, too controlled. Even the employees moved carefully, like people terrified of making mistakes. Claire noticed surveillance cameras hidden discreetly inside ceiling corners almost immediately. Motion sensors lined certain hallways, while electronic locks protected multiple sections of the mansion. Not even billionaires lived like this. Only men expecting enemies at every moment. Her assigned room overlooked dark forests stretching endlessly beyond the estate walls. The bedroom itself looked larger than her family apartment in Manhattan. Elegant furniture, private fireplace, marble bathroom, floor-to-ceiling windows. Yet despite the beauty, Claire felt trapped instantly because the door locked electronically from the outside. The realization sent cold anger through her chest. Prison hidden inside luxury still remained prison. Later that evening, Leonardo finally summoned her downstairs. Claire found him standing inside an enormous private library illuminated by soft amber lighting. Bookshelves stretched across 2 floors, while rain battered the tall windows behind him. He looked composed again, untouched by chaos. Only the fresh bandages beneath his sleeve hinted at the violence earlier that night. You'll attend public events beside me until the situation stabilizes, Leonardo said calmly without looking at her. The media already believes we're connected. Claire stared at him in disbelief. Connected? She repeated sharply. You announced ownership over me in front of half of New York. Leonardo's gaze shifted toward her slowly. I announced protection. There's a difference? Yes. The answer came immediately. Certain. Claire hated how emotionally calm he remained during every conversation. Nothing about him felt impulsive. Even silence seemed strategically calculated. What exactly are the rules here? She demanded. Leonardo studied her quietly before answering. You don't leave the property without security clearance. Claire's jaw tightened. You avoid the west wing and underground levels. That immediately increased her curiosity. You attend public appearances when necessary. And if I refuse? Leonardo walked closer slowly, not threateningly, but close enough that Claire felt the intensity behind his controlled presence. Then people trying to kill you become harder to stop. Again, terrifying honesty. No manipulation. No fake comfort. Just facts delivered coldly. That unsettled Claire far more deeply than intimidation would have, because she realized Leonardo never wasted energy lying unnecessarily. Afterward, he left the library without another word. No threats. No cruelty. No attempt controlling her physically. The restraint confused her constantly. Claire spent the next several days studying the mansion carefully, and the more she observed, the more dangerous everything felt. Marcus Vale monitored security operations obsessively, rarely sleeping more than a few hours. Armed guards rotated constantly across checkpoints surrounding the estate, while encrypted communications filled hidden control rooms throughout the mansion. Then there was Selena Moretti. Leonardo's cousin entered the estate 3 days after the gala attack. Unlike the cold brutality surrounding most members of Leonardo's organization, Selena carried herself with dangerous elegance and intelligence. She wore expensive designer clothing while discussing criminal logistics with the same calm professionalism other women used discussing business meetings. Claire quickly realized Selena was far more dangerous than Marcus, because Marcus looked like violence. Selena looked civilized while planning it. "You make Leonardo nervous," Selena told Claire unexpectedly during breakfast one morning. Claire nearly laughed. "Leonardo doesn't seem nervous about anything." Selena's expression darkened slightly. "That's exactly why it matters." Before Claire could question further, another man entered the dining hall, Adrian Cross. Leonardo introduced him later as one of his most trusted advisors. Claire distrusted him immediately. Adrian smiled too easily, watched people too carefully. Something about him felt dishonest beneath the polished charm. Unlike Marcus and Selena, Adrian behaved less like loyal family and more like someone constantly measuring weakness around him. Claire noticed Leonardo trusted him completely, which made her distrust him even more. Days passed slowly inside the mansion, and Claire's fear gradually transformed into something more complicated: curiosity, because nothing about Leonardo matched what she expected. He never touched her unnecessarily, never threatened her, never attempted emotional manipulation despite controlling nearly every aspect of her environment. Instead, he remained distant, protective, cold. That emotional restraint disturbed Claire deeply, especially because powerful men usually demanded control openly. Leonardo didn't. He acted like someone intentionally holding himself back constantly, which raised an even more terrifying possibility. What exactly was he restraining himself from? One evening, unable to ignore her instincts anymore, Claire began exploring restricted areas secretly, while most security teams focused on a political gathering downstairs. She discovered hidden surveillance corridors behind library walls, underground panic rooms stocked for military-level emergencies, encrypted security systems protecting lower sections of the mansion, and inside Leonardo's private office, burned documents hidden partially inside the fireplace. Claire carefully pulled several damaged papers free: financial transfers, political names, government officials connected to offshore accounts. Before she could fully examine them, movement outside the office forced her deeper into the room. That was when she noticed the photographs. Her breath caught instantly. Several surveillance photos rested partially hidden inside Leonardo's desk drawer. Photos of her, not recent ones. Old photographs. Claire leaving college years earlier, walking beside her father outside Bennett Holdings headquarters nearly a decade ago. One image showed her sitting alone in a cafe reading financial reports when she looked barely 20 years old. Fear turned ice cold instantly. Leonardo had known who she was long before the gala, maybe for years. Her hands trembled slightly while staring at the images. This was not coincidence, not protection, not random attraction. She was connected to something far larger than she understood. Then she noticed another photograph tucked beneath the others. A woman with dark hair standing beside Leonardo years earlier. Beautiful, elegant, and familiar somehow. On the back of the photograph, one word was written carefully in faded ink: Vivian. Later that night, Claire overheard two staff members whispering nervously outside the hallway near her room. The conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed her approaching, but she still caught fragments. Same thing happened to the other woman. Nobody talks about Vivian anymore. She disappeared after learning the truth. Claire felt dread tighten inside her chest again. Another woman once lived here, and something terrible happened after she discovered secrets hidden inside the mansion. That realization changed everything, because suddenly Claire understood the true danger surrounding Leonardo Moretti. Not violence, not criminal power. Secrets. The mansion survived on secrets powerful enough to erase people permanently. Hours later, unable to sleep, Claire wandered quietly to the dark hallway outside her room. That was when she heard voices through the walls nearby. Male voices, armed guards speaking softly near one of the security checkpoints. "Doesn't make sense," one man muttered quietly. "She should have died at the gala with the others." A long pause followed. Then another voice answered coldly. She was never supposed to survive the gala. After overhearing the guards outside her hallway, Claire Bennett stopped believing the gala attack had been random. Someone expected her to die that night, and somehow Leonardo Moretti had prevented it. That realization poisoned every moment inside the mansion afterward. The estate no longer felt merely dangerous. It felt calculated, like she had unknowingly walked into a war already built around her long before she arrived. Outside the mansion walls, tensions escalated rapidly across New York's criminal underworld after the failed assassination attempt at the gala. Armed patrols doubled around the estate, while encrypted communications echoed constantly through security checkpoints. Marcus Vale barely slept anymore. Claire noticed exhaustion hardening his face each day as he coordinated shifting security routes throughout the property. Additional armored vehicles appeared outside the mansion, while helicopters occasionally circled above nearby forests during the night. Someone was preparing for war, and Leonardo expected it to happen soon. The strange part was how calm he remained through all of it. 3 days after the attack, Claire descended into the kitchen early one morning and found Leonardo sitting alone near the massive glass windows overlooking the Rainey estate grounds. Files covered the dining table around him. Political names, financial reports, security photographs. The material looked less like criminal operations and more like intelligence collected against governments. Leonardo didn't immediately notice her standing there. For the first time, Claire saw exhaustion behind his cold expression. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, like a man carrying responsibilities heavy enough to slowly hollow him out from the inside. Then his attention shifted toward her instantly. The weakness vanished just as quickly. Control returned. Always control. "You shouldn't wander the mansion alone," he said calmly. Claire folded her arms. "You shouldn't secretly collect photographs of me for years." Silence settled between them immediately. She saw something darken behind his expression. Not surprise. Acceptance. That terrified her more, because it confirmed what she already suspected. Leonardo had expected her to discover the truth eventually. "You searched my office," he said quietly. "You stalked my life." His gaze held hers steadily. "No," he corrected. "I protected it." Claire almost laughed at the insanity of the answer. "You knew who I was before the gala." "Yes." The honesty hit harder than denial would have. No hesitation. No excuses. Just truth delivered calmly enough to make it feel even more dangerous. Claire stepped closer. "How long?" Leonardo remained silent briefly before answering. "Years." The word landed like a physical blow. For several seconds, Claire genuinely could not process the realization fully. Years. This man had watched her life in the shadows for years while she struggled through debt, public humiliation, and financial collapse without ever understanding why. Fear mixed violently with anger. "You manipulated everything," she whispered. "No." Leonardo stood slowly from the table. "Everything was already moving long before you understood it existed." Claire hated how cryptic he sounded constantly. Every answer created larger questions. Before she could continue, Marcus entered the dining room abruptly. "There's movement from Wolf territory." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Leonardo's expression hardened. "How many?" "Enough to worry me." Marcus noticed Claire nearby and immediately stopped speaking further. That reaction alone confirmed something important. They were hiding information specifically connected to her. Leonardo turned toward Marcus calmly. "Increase eastern perimeter rotation. Nobody enters without direct approval." Marcus nodded before leaving quickly. Claire watched Leonardo carefully. "Who's Wolf?" A long silence followed. Then Leonardo finally answered. "Damian Wolf controls one of the largest syndicates on the East Coast." His voice remained calm, but Claire noticed tension hidden underneath it for the first time. "He also wants you alive." Fear tightened inside her chest. "Why?" Leonardo looked directly at her. "Because your father stole something valuable before he died." The room suddenly felt colder. Claire's father again. Always her father. Every secret somehow led back to Richard Bennett. "My father was accused of fraud," she said carefully. Leonardo's expression darkened slightly. "Your father exposed financial operations connected to politicians, judges, and criminal syndicates. The fraud investigation was created afterward to silence him. Claire's heartbeat accelerated painfully. No, that couldn't be true. Her father spent years trying to protect the company from corruption. He hated criminal influence inside business networks. Leonardo walked toward the massive windows slowly. Richard Bennett discovered laundering systems connected to offshore government accounts, human trafficking profits, political bribery, international shell corporations. Each word made Claire feel sicker. He gathered evidence, Leonardo continued. Then he disappeared before releasing it publicly. Claire stared at him in disbelief. You said disappeared. Another silence. Not dead. Disappeared. That single difference shattered years of assumptions instantly. You know what happened to him? Claire whispered. Leonardo's jaw tightened slightly. I know enough. The answer felt intentionally incomplete. Claire realized something horrifying then. Leonardo rarely lied directly. Instead, he weaponized partial truth. That made him infinitely more dangerous. Later that afternoon, Claire secretly searched through the financial files she had stolen earlier from Leonardo's office fireplace. At first, the information looked incomprehensible. Encrypted account numbers, offshore banking transfers, political campaign donations linked to fake charities. Then she noticed something disturbing. Several documents referenced Bennett, holdings repeatedly, her father's company, the same company currently collapsing beneath debt and lawsuits. Suddenly, Claire understood something terrifying. The business was never financially worthless. Someone wanted control over it desperately, because hidden somewhere inside Bennett Holdings existed access to something far more valuable than money. Hours later, Selena Moretti quietly confirmed her fears. Claire found Selena alone inside one of the mansion's private lounges, reviewing intelligence reports beside a fireplace. You deserve partial truth, Selena said without looking up. Claire crossed her arms cautiously. That would be a nice change. Selena ignored the sarcasm. Your father built encrypted financial pathways before he disappeared. Those pathways connect to hidden offshore accounts containing evidence against extremely powerful people. Claire's stomach tightened. And somehow I'm connected to this? Selena finally looked toward her. You inherited access codes without realizing it. The words hit harder than expected. Claire suddenly remembered countless strange details from childhood. Her father teaching her specific number sequences as memory games, old security phrases hidden inside birthday cards, random conversations about never trusting banks connected to government officials. At the time, they meant nothing. Now everything felt terrifyingly intentional. The people hunting you, Selena continued quietly, aren't afraid of what you know. Claire felt cold dread rising slowly. They're afraid of what you might eventually uncover. The realization changed everything. This was never about money alone. It was about secrets capable of collapsing political systems. And somehow, Claire carried the final missing piece without even understanding where it was hidden. That night, Claire secretly searched online archives connected to her father's old investigations using encrypted systems inside the mansion library. What she discovered destroyed the final remains of her normal world forever. Federal judges connected to shell corporations, senators receiving offshore transfers, charity foundations laundering trafficking profits internationally, public officials protected by organized crime networks reaching across multiple countries. The deeper Claire searched, the more horrifying the truth became. The criminal underworld did not exist beneath politics. It existed inside it. The people appearing on television promising justice were secretly financing violence themselves. And men like Leonardo Moretti survived because governments needed monsters useful enough to hide their own corruption. Claire finally understood why the gala attack terrified so many powerful guests. Not because criminals started shooting, because criminals started shooting publicly. The illusion separating politics and organized crime nearly collapsed in front of witnesses. Suddenly, footsteps approached behind her. Claire closed the files instantly. Leonardo stood near the library entrance, watching her quietly. Neither spoke immediately. Rain battered the tall windows surrounding the darkroom, while shadows flickered from the fireplace nearby. You should have told me, Claire finally said. Leonardo's expression remained unreadable. You wouldn't have believed me. Now I'm supposed to trust you? His gaze lowered briefly toward the encrypted files. You don't have to trust me. The answer surprised her. Most powerful men demanded loyalty constantly. Leonardo never did. That emotional restraint unsettled her more deeply every day. Claire looked at him carefully. Why me? For the first time since meeting him, genuine emotion flickered briefly across Leonardo's face. Regret. You were supposed to stay uninvolved. The statement felt painfully honest. But you claim me publicly anyway. Yes. Why? A long silence followed. Then Leonardo answered quietly enough that she almost missed it. Because Damian Wolf discovered who you were first. Fear crawled slowly down Claire's spine. Leonardo had not declared ownership over her out of obsession, or attraction, or power. He had done it because another monster was already coming for her. That realization should have comforted her. Instead, it made everything worse. Because now Claire understood she had become the center of a hidden war between men powerful enough to erase entire lives. And Leonardo Moretti had entered that war willingly for her, which meant either she was far more important than she realized, or far more dangerous. Hours later, unable to sleep, Claire wandered deeper into the mansion, searching for answers nobody wanted her finding. Eventually, she discovered a hidden elevator concealed behind a rotating bookshelf inside the lower library corridor. The elevator descended beneath the estate, slowly into darkness. Underground archives stretched beneath the mansion like buried secrets nobody intended exposing. Rows of locked cabinets filled the underground chamber alongside old surveillance files, financial records, photographs, and classified intelligence collected over decades. Claire searched carefully through the dimly lit room, then suddenly froze. One photograph rested partially exposed atop a nearby file folder. Old, faded, taken nearly 15 years earlier. The image showed a younger Leonardo standing beside Richard Bennett outside a private Manhattan courthouse. And beside them, a small girl around 12 years old, smiling toward the camera. Claire, her blood turned cold instantly, because the photograph proved one terrifying truth beyond denial. Leonardo Moretti had been connected to her family long before the gala, long before the investigations, long before her father disappeared. And somehow, Claire had known him once without ever remembering it. After discovering the photograph hidden beneath Leonardo Moretti's mansion, Claire Bennett stopped seeing herself as a protected outsider trapped inside criminal warfare. She became something far more dangerous, a missing piece inside a secret that powerful men had spent years trying to bury. And the worst part was realizing Leonardo had known that from the beginning. The photograph haunted her constantly over the following days. A younger Leonardo standing beside her father, watching over her long before she ever knew his name. Nothing inside the mansion felt accidental anymore. Not the gala, not the declaration, not the protection. Every moment now carried the weight of manipulation hidden beneath silence. Claire needed answers beyond the carefully controlled fragments Leonardo allowed her to see, which meant she needed freedom. Real freedom, not luxury disguised as protection. So she began planning her escape. Quietly, carefully. The mansion surveillance systems looked impossible at first, but Claire had already spent weeks observing patterns throughout the estate. Marcus Vale rotated security shifts with military precision, yet even the strongest systems carried weaknesses created by routine, especially during storms. Heavy rain distorted thermal imaging across portions of the outer grounds, while electrical fluctuations occasionally forced backup systems to recalibrate for several seconds at a time. Small weaknesses, but enough. Claire secretly mapped blind spots using reflections from hallway mirrors and timing gaps between camera rotations. She memorized guard movements, learned electronic lock delays, studied underground service tunnels connected to older sections of the estate, and all the while, Leonardo watched her differently, not suspiciously, almost knowingly. That unsettled her more than direct confrontation would have. Twice she caught him observing her silently from across the mansion with an unreadable expression in his eyes, like a man waiting for something inevitable. The night she finally escaped, thunder shook the estate hard enough to rattle the massive glass windows throughout the mansion. Rain poured endlessly across the isolated property, while lightning flashed over surrounding forests. perfect conditions. Claire waited until shortly after midnight, when portions of the outer surveillance grid shifted temporarily onto backup generators. Then she moved, fast, silent. The underground corridor behind the library remained unguarded exactly 3 minutes during electrical recalibration cycles. Claire slipped through hidden service tunnels beneath the mansion before security systems fully adjusted again. Cold water dripped from ancient stone ceilings, while emergency red lights flickered across narrow underground pathways. For several terrifying minutes, she expected alarms to explode throughout the estate. Nothing happened. That silence felt wrong. By the time Claire reached the outer forest beyond the estate walls, rain had soaked through her clothes completely. Still no alarms, no guards, no pursuit. She disappeared into the storm-covered wilderness alone. Inside the mansion, Marcus Vale discovered her disappearance less than 20 minutes later. The reaction was immediate chaos. Security teams mobilized across the estate, while armed vehicles prepared search routes throughout surrounding counties. Marcus barked orders through encrypted communications, while Selena reviewed possible extraction points Claire might target. Everyone expected Leonardo to respond violently. Instead, he remained disturbingly calm. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "We can recover her within the hour." Leonardo slowly poured himself a drink near the dark library windows overlooking the storm. "No." The single word silenced the room. Marcus frowned. "Wolf's people are already searching the city." "I know. Then why are we bringing her back?" Leonardo's expression hardened slightly. "Because if she feels imprisoned, she'll never trust me." Marcus looked genuinely stunned by the answer. So did Selena. Leonardo rarely explained emotional reasoning behind decisions, especially not decisions risking strategic stability. Yet despite the danger surrounding Claire, he refused to force her return. Instead, he quietly ordered all security teams to stand down publicly while secretly assigning hidden surveillance units to track her movements from a distance. Protect her, but never touch her, even if she never realized it. Hours later, Claire reached the outskirts of Brooklyn exhausted, freezing and emotionally overwhelmed. Freedom should have felt victorious. Instead, it felt terrifyingly empty. For the first time in weeks, nobody monitored her movements. Nobody locked doors behind her. Nobody controlled her environment. Yet the absence of protection felt strangely vulnerable after surviving inside Leonardo's world. That realization disturbed her deeply, because it suggested something emotionally dangerous. Part of her had started feeling safe near him. Claire rented a cheap motel room beneath a false name, using emergency cash stolen from the mansion earlier that week. Then she spent the next several days hiding carefully while trying to reconnect with fragments of her father's old investigation. The deeper she searched, the more isolated she became. Every contact connected to Richard Bennett either refused speaking openly or disappeared entirely after hearing her name. Fear followed her everywhere now. Not ordinary fear. The kind, powerful people create when entire systems depend on silence. Eventually, one former journalist agreed meeting her secretly inside an abandoned diner outside Newark. Harold Mercer looked 20 years older than the man appearing in archive photographs beside her father years earlier. Nervous, broken, like someone destroyed slowly by truths nobody else wanted hearing. The moment Claire mentioned Leonardo Moretti, Harold's face tightened visibly. "You shouldn't trust him," he warned quietly. Claire crossed her arms. "I don't." Harold studied her carefully. "Then why are you still alive?" The question unsettled her immediately. Harold leaned closer across the table. "Your father once believed Leonardo wanted out." Claire frowned. "Out of what?" "All of it." Harold's expression darkened. "The trafficking networks, political laundering, syndicate control systems." That contradicted everything Claire believed about Leonardo. Harold continued quietly. "Years ago, Leonardo tried dismantling parts of the organization internally after discovering what certain council members were funding. Human trafficking?" Harold nodded once. "They murdered people close to him for it." The revelation hit Claire unexpectedly hard, because suddenly Leonardo's emotional restraint made disturbing sense. A man surrounded by betrayal long enough eventually stopped allowing himself emotional vulnerability at all. "That's why Wolf hates him," Harold added. Leonardo stopped being useful to the people controlling the system. Claire remembered the exhaustion hidden briefly behind Leonardo's cold expression days earlier. Not the exhaustion of a ruthless king enjoying power, the exhaustion of someone trapped beneath it. Still, manipulation remained manipulation, even if his intentions were complicated. Claire left the diner more conflicted than before. The storm inside her thoughts grew worse each day away from the mansion, because freedom brought clarity, but also loneliness. For the first time in her life, Claire realized freedom without trust could feel lonelier than captivity. That emotional truth terrified her more than violence, because despite everything Leonardo had hidden from her, part of her still remembered how safe she felt standing beside him during gunfire at the gala, how carefully he avoided controlling her emotionally despite having every opportunity, how he let her leave. Most dangerous men would have hunted her immediately. Leonardo hadn't, and somehow that hurt more. 3 nights later, everything collapsed. Claire had just returned to her motel after meeting another contact connected to her father's investigation when she noticed the silence first. No traffic nearby, no voices, no movement. Instinct screamed danger immediately. Then headlights flooded the parking lot outside. Black SUVs. Too many. Claire's blood turned cold. Damien Wolfe found her. Armed men exited the vehicles rapidly, surrounding the motel from every direction with military precision. Claire barely escaped to the rear hallway before gunfire erupted behind her. Glass shattered. Walls exploded around her. People screamed somewhere nearby as Wolfe's men stormed the building, searching room by room. Rain poured heavily across the alley behind the motel, while Claire ran blindly through narrow streets illuminated by flashing headlights. Fear became pure survival instinct. She could hear footsteps closing behind her, vehicles cutting off intersections, professional hunters surrounding prey. Then suddenly someone grabbed her violently from behind. Claire struggled instantly, but the man slammed her hard against a brick wall before she could escape. Wolf Syndicate. Tattoo across his throat. Dead eyes filled with cruel amusement. "We finally found you." More armed men approached through the rain, while Claire's panic intensified sharply. Not because they planned killing her, because they clearly intended taking her alive. The realization felt far worse. One of the men raised a phone. "Tell Wolf we have her." Then gunfire exploded from the darkness. The man holding Claire collapsed instantly, with blood spraying across the rain-soaked pavement. Chaos erupted. More shots thundered through the alley as shadows moved violently between parked vehicles. Professional, brutal, efficient. Claire stumbled backward in shock, while Wolf's men dropped one after another beneath precise gunfire. Then she saw him emerging slowly through the storm. Leonardo Moretti. Blood covered portions of his black coat, while rain poured down his face. His expression looked colder than she had ever seen before. Not rage. Something worse. Controlled violence stripped completely free of mercy. Another man stepped from the shadows nearby. One of Leonardo's own captains. Claire recognized him from the mansion security teams. For one brief second, confusion crossed her mind. Then the captain raised his weapon toward Leonardo. Betrayal. Leonardo fired first. The shot echoed brutally through the alley. His trusted captain collapsed lifelessly into the rain, while silence swallowed the street afterward. Claire stared at Leonardo in horror as thunder rolled overhead, because she suddenly realized the war surrounding her had become far more personal than she ever imagined. Rain continued falling long after the gunfight ended behind the abandoned motel. Bodies remained scattered across the flooded alley while distant sirens echoed somewhere beyond the city blocks. But Claire Bennett barely noticed any of it. Her attention stayed locked on Leonardo Moretti. Blood covered portions of his black coat. His breathing remained controlled despite obvious injuries. And beside him lay the corpse of one of his own trusted captains, a man Leonardo had executed without hesitation seconds earlier, not because of rivalry, because of betrayal. The realization unsettled Claire more deeply than the violence itself. Leonardo stared briefly at the body before turning toward Marcus Vale, who emerged from another vehicle with armed security teams surrounding the alley. "Clean it," Leonardo ordered calmly. No emotion, no visible reaction to killing someone who once stood inside his inner circle. Marcus nodded immediately before escorting surviving guards toward the remaining Wolf Syndicate attackers. Claire finally found her voice. "That was one of your men." Leonardo looked at her quietly through the rain. "He stopped being my man the moment he sold your location." The answer sent cold tension through her chest, because now Claire understood the true danger surrounding Leonardo's empire. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. Not completely. Not even inside his closest circle. The war had already spread too deeply. Hours later, the convoy returned to mansion under extreme security lockdown. Additional guards patrolled every corridor, while helicopters circled above the estate continuously through the night. But despite the overwhelming security presence, the mansion no longer felt powerful. It felt unstable, like a kingdom already cracking beneath invisible pressure. Claire noticed immediately. Employees whispered more nervously. Security teams questioned orders more often. Fear no longer came only from enemies outside the state. Now it existed inside the organization itself. Leonardo's empire was beginning to fracture, and everyone knew it. Inside the private medical wing beneath the mansion, a doctor stitched fresh wounds across Leonardo's shoulder, while Marcus reviewed intelligence reports nearby. Claire stood silently against the wall, watching everything unfold. Leonardo barely reacted during treatment. Pain seemed almost irrelevant to him. That emotional numbness disturbed her now for different reasons than before. Not because he lacked humanity, because maybe survival had forced him to bury it. Marcus finally placed the several files onto the nearby table. We confirmed another breach inside the council. Leonardo didn't look surprised. Names. Marcus hesitated briefly. 2 senators, a federal prosecutor, 3 shipping executives. Claire stared in disbelief. Political leaders, government officials, corporate elites, not random criminals hiding beneath society. People helping control it publicly. Marcus opened another file revealing offshore account transfers connected to international trafficking routes. Wolf expanded operations through Baltimore and Miami after the Gala attack. Claire felt sick reading portions of the reports. Human trafficking payments disguised as humanitarian aid funding. Private security contracts covering transportation routes for illegal operations. Judges receiving hidden transfers tied to organized crime networks. The deeper she looked, the clearer the horrifying truth became. The Mafia war was never truly about territory. It was about power over information. Leonardo possessed evidence capable of exposing systems powerful people spent decades building in secret, and that made him more dangerous than any rival syndicate leader. Because a criminal empire could survive violence, governments could not survive truth. Leonardo noticed Claire staring at the files. "You should leave." She looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because understanding this world makes survival harder." Claire almost laughed bitterly. "That stopped being my choice the moment you dragged me into it." For several seconds, silence settled heavily between them. Then Leonardo dismissed the medical staff, and Marcus quietly left the room as well, leaving Claire alone with him for the first time since the ambush. The atmosphere changed immediately. Less guarded, more dangerous emotionally. Leonardo slowly buttoned a fresh black shirt over newly bandaged wounds before walking toward the large reinforced windows overlooking the dark forest beyond the estate. "You think I created this," he said quietly. Claire crossed her arms. "Didn't you?" A long pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, Leonardo answered honestly. "No." The single word carried something heavier than denial. Regret. Claire watched him carefully while rain struck the glass outside. "When I was 14, Leonardo said quietly, "my family was executed during a council betrayal." The confession surprised her enough that she said nothing. Leonardo rarely volunteered personal truth. Now his voice remained calm, but colder somehow. Controlled pain hidden beneath years of emotional discipline. "My father refused expanding trafficking operations through our territory. Certain people consider that weakness." Claire felt tension tighten slowly inside her chest. "One night, they burned our home with my mother and younger brother still inside." The words landed brutally in the silence. Leonardo's expression never changed while speaking, which somehow made the story even worse. because emotional numbness only forms after pain survives too long. I survived because one of my father's captains hid me before the attack began. Claire finally understood something important then. Leonardo was not born ruthless. He was shaped into ruthlessness by survival. They made you take control afterward, she realized quietly. Leonardo nodded once. The council needed someone young enough to manipulate, but they failed. A faint shadow crossed his expression. No, he corrected softly. They succeeded for a long time. Claire looked down at the trafficking files scattered across the table, and suddenly everything connected. The emotional distance, the constant restraint, the exhaustion hidden behind control. Leonardo wasn't protecting his empire anymore. He was trapped inside it. For years, maybe longer. That realization changed the way Claire looked at him permanently. Not innocent, never innocent, but human in ways she had refused acknowledging before. Over the following days, Claire became increasingly involved in Leonardo's hidden investigation against the syndicate network. Not because she trusted him completely, because she finally understood nobody else intended stopping the system. Together, they began tracing financial laundering operations through encrypted offshore transfers hidden beneath legitimate corporations. Claire's experience managing Bennett Holdings unexpectedly became valuable. She recognized manipulated accounting structures faster than most intelligence analysts working inside Leonardo's network. And the deeper she searched, the more horrifying the corruption became. Shipping companies moving trafficking victims internationally beneath political protection. Senators receiving payments through fake humanitarian foundations. Federal judges blackmailing witnesses connected to organized crime investigations. Every layer revealed another hidden system protecting the one beneath it. One evening, Claire discovered something unexpected buried inside encrypted archives connected to Leonardo's private servers. Thousands of files, surveillance records, financial evidence, names of politicians, judges, trafficking coordinators, and syndicate leaders. Evidence collected over years, carefully organized, systematically hidden. Her heartbeat accelerated slowly as realization formed. Leonardo had been building a case against his own empire for years. Not recently. Years. Claire found him alone later that night, inside the mansion library, reviewing security reports beside the fireplace. You planned this, she said quietly. Leonardo looked up. The collapse. Silence answered first. Then he leaned back slowly in the chair. I knew eventually the council would turn against me completely. Claire stared at him. So you prepared to destroy everything before they could. His gaze held hers steadily. I prepared to expose everyone. The truth hit harder than expected. Leonardo Moretti, the most feared Mafia leader in New York, had secretly spent years gathering evidence capable of destroying the criminal network he ruled. Not for power, for revenge, for redemption, maybe both. Claire sat across from him slowly. Why stay inside the organization at all? A faint bitterness touched Leonardo's expression. Because monsters build a system carefully enough that leaving openly only gets people killed. The answer carried painful experience behind it. Claire suddenly remembered Harold Mercer's warning again. Leonardo once tried leaving. People died because of it. That explained why he stayed emotionally distant from everyone around him. Attachment created weakness, and weakness got people buried. Yet despite all his restraint, something between them had already started changing. Claire noticed it in the quieter moments. The way Leonardo watched her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The way his voice softened almost imperceptibly during private conversations. The way she no longer felt immediate fear standing close to him. Shared trauma created dangerous intimacy, not romance, something deeper. Two people slowly recognizing broken pieces of themselves reflected in someone else. And that terrified Claire more than violence ever had, because emotional dependence inside a collapsing empire could destroy them both. 3 nights later, Leonardo hosted a secret meeting inside the estate with several remaining allies still loyal to him. Claire stayed nearby reviewing encrypted financial files, while armed security teams guarded the mansion heavily outside. Tension filled every hallway. Everyone expected another attack soon. The war was escalating too fast. Then suddenly the reinforced windows exploded inward. Gunfire thundered through the mansion. Chaos erupted instantly. Marcus shouted orders while security teams returned fire across the estate grounds. Claire turned just in time to see Leonardo shove one of the council members aside. Then blood burst violently across his chest. The sniper round hit hard enough to throw him backward. Claire caught him before he collapsed fully onto the marble floor. Shock froze her for one horrifying second as blood spread rapidly across his shirt beneath her hands. Outside, federal vehicles stormed through the estate gates from every direction, while armed agents surrounded the mansion under flashing lights and screaming sirens. And as Leonardo struggled weakly to stay conscious in her arms, Claire realized the war hidden behind power had finally reached its breaking point. The moment Leonardo Moretti collapsed into Claire Bennett's arms, the empire he spent years controlling began tearing itself apart. Gunfire thundered outside the mansion, while federal agents stormed the estate from every direction under flashing emergency lights. Smoke drifted through shattered hallways as panicked security teams exchanged fire across the property. Chaos swallowed everything. And at the center of it all, Leonardo bled across the marble floor, while Claire desperately pressed trembling hands against the wound in his chest. For one horrifying second, none of the power surrounding him mattered anymore. Not the money, not the empire, not the fear his name inspired across New York. He looked painfully human, vulnerable in ways Claire had never seen before. Marcus Vale reached them first. "We need to move now." Claire barely heard him. Leonardo's breathing had already become dangerously shallow. Blood spread rapidly beneath him, while shattered glass glittered across the floor nearby. Federal agents were getting closer, and somewhere beyond the estate walls, rival syndicates waited for confirmation that Leonardo Moretti had finally fallen. Marcus helped lift him while security teams forced open a hidden emergency passage beneath the mansion library. Claire followed beside them through underground tunnels buried deep beneath the estate as explosions echoed faintly overhead. The empire was collapsing in real time. By dawn, Leonardo underwent emergency surgery inside a secret medical facility hidden beyond the city outskirts. The procedure lasted nearly 6 hours. Claire spent every minute pacing the isolated hallway outside the operating room, while Marcus coordinated survival routes for the remaining loyal members of Leonardo's organization. Everything was unraveling faster than anyone expected. Federal raids exploded nationwide after encrypted evidence leaked anonymously across multiple intelligence agencies overnight. Safe houses, offshore accounts, trafficking routes, political protection systems. Entire criminal networks began collapsing simultaneously. News channels erupted nonstop with breaking reports involving senators, judges, and business executives suddenly connected to organized crime investigations. Public outrage spread rapidly. But beneath the chaos existed something even more dangerous. Panic, because powerful people realized someone inside the system had betrayed everyone, and they intended finding the source before the entire structure burned permanently. Hours later, the surgeon finally emerged from the operating room. He survived. The relief hit Claire, so hard she nearly lost balance. But the doctor's expression remained grim. For now, Leonardo stayed unconscious for nearly 2 days afterward. During that time, Claire witnessed the full brutality of the hidden war consuming the country. Media outlets suddenly began portraying her as Leonardo's criminal accomplice. Financial analysts on television connected the Bennett family company to laundering investigations, while political figures demanded her immediate arrest publicly. The manipulation happened too quickly to be coincidence. Someone powerful was redirecting blame strategically. Claire understood why almost immediately. If public attention focused on her and Leonardo personally, fewer people would investigate the deeper corruption hidden underneath. The system protected itself by sacrificing individuals first. Even now, especially now, inside the secure compound, Selena Moretti monitored national developments beside dozens of encrypted screens glowing through sleepless nights. Claire entered the operations room late one evening and stopped cold at the sight before her. Maps tracking trafficking routes, political networks, judicial connections, international laundering systems tied across multiple countries. The corruption reached further than she imagined possible. Selena looked exhausted when she finally turned toward Claire. Their try contained the damage. Claire crossed her arms tightly. Will it work? Selena's expression darkened. Not if enough evidence survives. That was when Claire realized something terrifying. The leaked information was only partial. Leonardo had spent years collecting material far larger than what federal agencies currently possessed, which meant every surviving syndicate leader now hunted the remaining evidence desperately, not for money, for survival. 3 days later, Leonardo finally regained consciousness. Claire found him alone inside a heavily guarded recovery room, surrounded by reinforced security doors and armed personnel. Weakness shadowed his features for the first time since she met him. But even injured, Leonardo still carried the same controlled stillness that made him feel dangerous. His eyes shifted toward her immediately. You stayed. The quiet words unsettled Claire unexpectedly, because they sounded less like assumption and more like surprise. You almost died, she answered carefully. Leonardo studied her silently for several seconds. Then his gaze lowered toward the television mounted across the room, showing federal raids unfolding live across Manhattan. Senators escorted into custody. Judges under investigation. International bank accounts frozen. The empire was burning, and Leonardo watched it happen without regret. That frightened Claire almost as much as his violence once had, because only deeply broken people could watch their entire world collapse so calmly. Later that night, Marcus arrived carrying additional intelligence, files recovered during the federal raids. Claire immediately noticed tension in his expression. What happened? Marcus placed the folders carefully onto the nearby table. We found communications between council members linked to the gala attack. Leonardo's face hardened instantly. Explain. Marcus hesitated briefly before opening the files. Encrypted conversations appeared across the documents involving multiple syndicate leaders, political financiers, and security coordinators. Then Claire saw her own name repeated throughout the communications. Her stomach tightened immediately. Marcus spoke quietly. The declaration at the gala wasn't spontaneous. Silence filled the room. Leonardo's eyes narrowed dangerously. What are you saying? Marcus looked directly at him. The council manipulated the entire event. Claire felt cold dread rising slowly through her chest. The gala, the attack, the public declaration. All planned. Marcus continued carefully. They discovered Claire's connection to the Bennett evidence months earlier. They believed publicly tying her to you would expose her location, while creating justification for future elimination. Leonardo's expression turned colder than Claire had ever seen before. Not rage. Something darker. Betrayal stripped completely free of restraint. They used me, he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. They expected Wolf Syndicate to eliminate both of you during the attack. The realization hit Claire like ice water. She was never supposed to survive becoming Leonardo Moretti's publicly declared protected target. Neither was Leonardo. The gala attack wasn't simply retaliation. It was an execution disguised as political warfare. And trusted members inside Leonardo's own empire arranged it together. Claire watched the truth settle across Leonardo's face slowly. Years of loyalty. Years of violence. Years spent protecting an organization secretly preparing his death from the beginning. Something inside him finally broke quietly in that moment. Not emotionally. Philosophically. Claire saw it clearly. Leonardo no longer wanted to save the empire. He wanted it erased. Over the following weeks, violence consumed every remaining syndicate territory across the East Coast. Rival factions turned against each other desperately, while federal investigations intensified daily. Entire operations disappeared overnight after intelligence leaks exposed safe houses and financial networks publicly. People once considered untouchables started falling. Governors, corporate executives, judges, trafficking coordinators hidden beneath respectable titles. The illusion protecting powerful people collapsed piece by piece. And through all of it, Claire transformed alongside the chaos. She stopped reacting emotionally first, started thinking strategically, analyzing patterns, tracing money routes, helping Selena coordinate intelligence releases carefully enough to maximize political damage. Fear no longer controlled her decisions. Understanding did. That transformation unsettled Leonardo deeply, because the more Claire understood his world, the more dangerous she became to it. Then came the ambush. Selena insisted on personally escorting Claire and Leonardo toward another secure extraction site after intelligence revealed federal agents compromised several remaining safe houses. The convoy moved through isolated industrial roads outside Philadelphia under heavy rain and armed protection. Everything felt wrong immediately. Too quiet, too empty. Claire noticed Selena checking mirrors constantly before finally speaking. "We're being tracked." Seconds later, explosions tore through the lead vehicle. The convoy erupted into chaos instantly. Gunfire flooded the dark roadway, while armored SUVs crashed violently into concrete barriers surrounding the highway. Wolf Syndicate. Again. Claire barely escaped the overturned vehicle before bullets shattered the windows beside her. Marcus returned fire alongside remaining guards, while Selena dragged Claire toward cover behind collapsed concrete pillars. Then more vehicles arrived. Too many. Professional kill teams surrounded the highway from every direction. Selena looked toward Leonardo, briefly across the battlefield, and Claire understood immediately. Someone needed to stay behind. "No," Claire whispered, but Selena already made the decision. She handed Claire an encrypted drive covered in blood. "Finish it." Then she turned back toward the gunfire before Claire could stop her. The explosion moments later shook the entire highway. Claire never even found enough of the vehicle afterward to identify remains. By the time the surviving convoy escaped, half of Leonardo's loyal allies were dead. The loss shattered something inside everyone remaining, especially Leonardo, because Selena Moretti was one of the last people he still trusted completely. Hours later, while hiding inside another temporary safe house, Claire sat alone staring numbly at the encrypted drive Selena died protecting. Rain struck the windows outside, while distant sirens echoed through the city below. Exhaustion hollowed everything inside her. Then suddenly her phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. Only 5 words. "Your father was never dead." The message changed everything. Your father was never dead. Claire Bennett stared at the glowing phone screen while silence swallowed the safe house around her. Rain struck the windows steadily outside, but for several long seconds she heard nothing except the violent pulse of disbelief crashing through her chest. Her father, alive. The possibility felt impossible. Cruel. Dangerous. Because if Richard Bennett truly survived all these years, then every lie surrounding her life suddenly became far bigger than she imagined. Leonardo Moretti entered the room moments later, still bruised from the highway ambush that killed Selena Moretti and half their remaining allies. He immediately noticed Claire's expression. "What happened?" Without speaking, Claire handed him the phone. Leonardo read the message once. Then again, something shifted behind his eyes instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. Claire felt cold anger rise immediately. "You knew this could be true." Leonardo remained silent too long. That alone answered her. "You knew," she repeated quietly. His jaw tightened. "I suspected." The confession felt like betrayal layered on top of exhaustion. Claire stood abruptly from the table. "You let me believe he was dead. I needed certainty before exposing you to him." Her voice sharpened instantly. "Exposing me?" Leonardo finally looked directly at her. "Your father disappeared because powerful people failed to kill him the first time." The room fell silent again. Not dead. Hunted. That reality felt infinitely worse. Hours later, Marcus Vale arranged secure transportation using abandoned federal routes still hidden from syndicate surveillance systems. The remaining loyal members of Leonardo's organization moved carefully through the outskirts of Washington under false identities, while riots and investigations spread across major cities nationwide. The world outside was beginning to fracture publicly. Politicians resigned hourly. Financial institutions collapsed under federal seizures. News broadcasts described international corruption networks unraveling in real time. And somewhere buried beneath all of it waited Richard Bennett. Claire barely spoke during the journey. Her emotions felt too complicated for language anymore. Hope mixed painfully with anger. Because if her father truly survived, Then he willingly stayed hidden while she spent years believing she lost him forever. That wound already hurt before understanding the reasons behind it. The safe house stood hidden beneath an abandoned coastal research facility several miles outside Baltimore. Armed guards secured every entrance, while encrypted surveillance systems monitored the surrounding shoreline continuously. Not a prison, a bunker designed for people surviving political assassinations. Marcus escorted Claire and Leonardo through reinforced underground corridors until they finally reached a heavily guarded steel door near the deepest section of the compound. Then Marcus stopped walking. He's inside. Claire's breathing slowed painfully. For one terrifying second, she could not force herself to move, because part of her still feared this was another manipulation, another cruel secret inside a world already drowning in lies. Then the door opened, and Richard Bennett stood waiting inside. Older, thinner, gray streaks cutting through dark hair. Claire barely remembered clearly anymore, but unmistakably real. For several seconds, neither moved. Years of grief crashed violently against disbelief inside Claire's chest while her father stared at her like someone seeing a ghost return from the dead. Then finally he stepped forward slowly. Emotion broke across his face instantly. Claire crossed the room before thinking. The embrace shattered whatever emotional control she still possessed. For the first time since the gala attack, she cried openly, not from fear, from relief tangled painfully with betrayal, because her father was alive, and he abandoned her anyway. Richard held her tightly while guilt hollowed his expression. "I'm sorry," he whispered repeatedly. The words only hurt more. Hours later, after emotions settled enough for truth to finally surface, Richard Bennett explained everything, and the deeper the truth went, the more horrifying the hidden system became. The corruption poisoning organized crime never started with syndicates alone. Political elites built it deliberately decades earlier. Senators, judges, corporate financiers, intelligence officials. They used criminal organizations as invisible infrastructure for operations governments publicly denied existing. Trafficking routes, offshore laundering systems, political blackmail networks, illegal weapons financing. And years earlier, Richard Bennett discovered evidence connecting those systems together financially. He wanted to expose everything publicly. Leonardo explained quietly from across the room. Claire looked toward him sharply. "You knew my father?" Richard answered instead. Leonardo's father helped create the original alliances. The revelation changed the atmosphere instantly. Claire's eyes shifted back toward Leonardo. His expression darkened slightly. "My father believed criminal control could stabilize political corruption," Leonardo said quietly. He was wrong. Richard nodded grimly. By the time he realized that, the system had already grown too large. Claire slowly sat down, overwhelmed by the scale of what she was hearing. Leonardo's father helped build the empire. Her father tried destroying it, and now both sons carried the consequences. Richard continued explaining how trafficking operations expanded beneath political protection over the years until entire governments became financially dependent on criminal systems remaining hidden. "When I threatened exposing the networks," Richard said quietly, "they targeted everyone connected to me." Claire's chest tightened. "Our family." Yes. Her mother, her father, their company. Everything collapsed because they tried exposing the truth. Not because they failed, because they became dangerous. Claire finally understood why powerful people hunted her specifically. Not because of money, because she represented unfinished evidence, threatening everyone involved. One terrible realization followed immediately afterward. "Why didn't you come back for me?" The question silenced the room. Richard looked devastated instantly. "If they discovered you still had access to the encrypted accounts, they would have killed you." Claire's anger surfaced sharply. "So you disappeared instead?" "I protected you the only way I could." The answer sounded painfully sincere. But sincerity could not erase years of abandonment. Sometimes the most dangerous prisons were built from emotional loyalty instead of force. Claire understood that now. Her father imprisoned himself inside, hiding to protect her. Leonardo imprisoned himself inside violence, trying to destroy the system, consuming him. And somehow both choices still destroyed the people they loved anyway. Over the following days, final preparations began for releasing the remaining evidence publicly. The operation required multiple coordinated leaks across international intelligence agencies, financial regulators, and media organizations simultaneously. If even one portion failed, powerful survivors inside the system would bury the truth permanently. Claire became central to the plan, not because she carried evidence anymore, because she carried credibility. The daughter of Richard Bennett publicly testifying against political corruption would destroy the remaining narrative protecting the syndicates. Federal agencies already contacted them, secretly offering protective custody in exchange for testimony. For the first time since the Gala attack, Claire stopped feeling like prey dragged helplessly through someone else's war. She became part of ending it. That transformation changed something inside Leonardo, too. Claire noticed it during quieter moments between strategy meetings and intelligence briefings. He watched her differently now, less protectively, more honestly, like someone slowly allowing himself emotional vulnerability after years spent burying it beneath survival instincts. Late one evening, Claire found him alone outside the coastal compound, overlooking the dark Atlantic waves crashing beneath storm clouds. The wind pulled against his coat, while exhaustion shadowed his face deeply. "You could still disappear," Claire said quietly. Leonardo looked toward the ocean. "No, the evidence would survive without you. That's not enough." Claire moved closer beside him. "Why?" For several seconds he remained silent, then finally answered with painful honesty. "Because I spent too many years helping monsters survive." The confession hurt more than denial, not because she judged him, because she heard genuine regret inside his voice. Leonardo looked toward her slowly. "For a long time I convinced myself controlling the empire was better than abandoning it." Claire understood immediately. Power felt safer than helplessness, especially after surviving trauma severe enough to destroy normal morality. But now Leonardo stood at the edge of losing everything willingly just to expose the system permanently, not for control, for redemption. And somewhere during the chaos between violence and betrayal, Claire stopped fearing him completely. That realization terrified her in entirely different ways. The final operation began 48 hours later. Simultaneous evidence uploads activated across international servers, while encrypted files transferred toward media outlets, federal investigators, and foreign intelligence agencies all at once. Everything depended on surviving the next several hours. But Damian Wolf moved first. The attack hit just before dawn. Explosions tore through the outer perimeter surrounding the coastal compound, while armed syndicate forces stormed the facility from multiple directions under heavy gunfire. Wolf launched everything he had left. Vehicles crashed through barricades, while mercenaries flooded the compound, firing military-grade weapons through the underground corridors. Chaos erupted instantly. Claire barely escaped the operations room before bullets shattered the walls around her. Marcus coordinated defensive teams, while Richard secured the final evidence transmissions manually. And through all of it, Leonardo fought like a man already accepting death. Not recklessly, purposefully. Claire saw it clearly. He no longer cared about surviving the war, only ending it. The deeper Wolf's forces pushed into the compound, the more brutal the fighting became. Smoke filled the underground hallways, while emergency alarms echoed through collapsing corridors. Then Claire saw Wolf himself advancing to the lower command center, surrounded by heavily armed men. Everything happened too fast afterward. Leonardo stepped directly into Wolf's line of fire before Claire could react. Gunshots exploded violently through the chamber. One round struck Leonardo hard across the side. Another tore through his shoulder. He still kept moving, still protected her, still refused falling. Claire caught him seconds later as blood spread rapidly beneath her hands again. Around them, the final evidence upload reached completion. The system was collapsing publicly in real time, but none of it mattered to Claire anymore, because Leonardo's breathing was weakening fast in her arms. And as fear hollowed her chest completely, Claire realized the emotional truth she spent months fighting had already become unavoidable. She loved him, and she might lose him before ever saying it. The war ended quietly, not with celebration, not with victory speeches, but with silence spreading across hospital hallways, while surgeons fought to keep Leonardo Moretti alive behind reinforced operating room doors. Claire Bennett sat alone beneath harsh white lights for nearly 6 hours without moving. Blood still stained the sleeves of her coat from the final confrontation at the coastal compound. Federal agents filled the hospital corridors outside, while news broadcasts played continuously across mounted television screens overhead. Every screen carried the same headlines: international trafficking networks exposed, federal indictments issued nationwide, political leaders arrested, financial systems frozen. The empire that once controlled cities from the shadows was collapsing publicly in real time. And somehow the man who helped destroy it was still fighting for his life only a few feet away. Claire barely heard the reporters speaking anymore. Her mind remained trapped inside one terrifying realization. Leonardo almost died protecting her again. The operating room doors finally opened shortly after sunrise. A surgeon stepped forward carefully. He survived the surgery. The words nearly broke her, not because the danger ended, because relief hurt after carrying fear too long. Leonardo remained unconscious for 2 days afterward. During those 48 hours, the world transformed rapidly outside the hospital walls. Federal investigations expanded across multiple countries. Judges resigned publicly before arrest warrants reached them. Private banking systems collapsed beneath international scrutiny. Corporate executives disappeared overnight. Every hidden structure protecting the syndicates began turning against itself. Fear spread upward for first time instead of downward. And at the center of the collapse stood Claire Bennett. The media initially portrayed her as Leonardo's accomplice, a manipulated woman connected to organized crime. But once the evidence became public, that narrative shattered immediately. Survivors from trafficking networks began speaking publicly. Former victims identified powerful officials involved in operations. Financial documents connected respected political figures directly to violence spanning decades. And slowly, public perception around Claire changed. She stopped being viewed as the woman standing beside a mafia boss. She became the woman who helped expose the system entirely. Federal prosecutors requested her testimony personally. News organizations called her brave. Survivors called her proof that powerful men could finally lose. Claire hated the attention, but she accepted it anyway, because too many people died protecting the truth for her to hide from it now. When Leonardo finally regained consciousness, the world waiting outside his hospital room no longer belonged to the empire he once controlled. It belonged to consequences. Claire entered quietly the first evening. He fully woke. His injuries left him pale and weakened beneath the dim hospital lighting. Machines monitored his heartbeat steadily, while bruises darkened the edges of his face and throat. Yet the moment he saw her standing there, something inside his guarded expression softened instantly. Not power, not control, relief. Claire sat beside the bed silently. For a long moment, neither spoke. After everything they survived, words suddenly felt too small. Finally, Leonardo broke the silence first. The evidence? It worked. His eyes closed briefly, not from exhaustion, from acceptance. Years spent building criminal power ended with him destroying it himself. And strangely, Claire realized he looked freer now than he ever had inside the mansion. Federal agents questioned Leonardo several days later, after doctors confirmed he would survive permanently. The old Leonardo Moretti would have manipulated the situation strategically, protected assets, negotiated leverage, controlled outcomes. This version did none of those things. He cooperated completely, provided hidden financial records voluntarily, identified surviving corrupt officials, gave prosecutors access to encrypted systems no agency could have uncovered alone. Marcus Vail later described it simply. Leonardo stopped fighting for power the moment he decided Claire mattered more. That truth followed him everywhere afterward. Public opinion remained divided initially. Some viewed him as a criminal pretending to become redeemable after losing the war. Others saw a man destroying the very empire protecting him because guilt finally outweighed ambition. But the deeper investigators dug into the evidence, the clearer one fact became. Leonardo had secretly gathered information against his own organization for years. long before Claire entered his life, long before the gala attack, long before he publicly declared her his. The realization changed how people saw him, not as a hero, but as a man who spent years trapped inside a system he no longer believed deserved surviving. Recovery came slowly afterward, not dramatically. Quietly, Claire moved temporarily into a protected coastal property provided through federal security programs while the trials prepared nationally. Leonardo remained under restricted supervision due to ongoing investigations, but prosecutors quietly reduced pressure after his cooperation dismantled multiple international operations. For the first time in years, both of them existed outside survival mode, and neither fully knew how to live there. The silence felt unfamiliar. No gunfire, no surveillance teams hiding through hallways, no emergency escape routes waiting beneath every room. Just ordinary mornings filled with uncomfortable peace. Claire noticed emotional damage more clearly during those quiet days than during the violence. Leonardo struggled sleeping without checking security systems repeatedly. Crowded public places triggered automatic threat assessments inside his mind. Even simple moments carried exhaustion beneath them. Years of survival had rewired him completely. But Claire understood trauma now, too. She no longer saw emotional numbness as cruelty. Sometimes it was simply the cost of staying alive too long. One evening several weeks later, Claire found Leonardo sitting alone outside the coastal house, watching waves strike the shoreline beneath fading sunset light. The scene felt strangely familiar, like the beginning of something softer growing from the ruins. She sat beside him quietly. "You could disappear now," she said after a while. Leonardo glanced toward her carefully. "I thought about it, but..." He looked back toward the ocean. "I'm tired of running from what I became." The honesty in his voice felt heavier than any confession before it. Claire studied him silently. Gone was the untouchable Mafia leader who once controlled entire rooms through fear alone. This version looked emotionally stripped bare by survival, guilt, and loss. Human. For a long moment, neither moved. Then finally Claire asked a question haunting her since the gala. "Why did you really claim me that night?" Leonardo's expression darkened slightly. The gala wasn't random. Claire stayed silent. He continued carefully. "Your father's investigation resurfaced weeks earlier. Powerful people realized you still had access connected to the evidence." Claire's chest tightened slowly. "They were going to kill me." "Yes." The word landed heavily between them. Leonardo finally looked directly at her. "I'd already watched too many people disappear because I hesitated." Claire understood immediately. The vanished woman from a mansion, the people he failed protecting during earlier wars. Selena, everyone buried beneath the Empire's violence. "I knew once they targeted you publicly, you wouldn't survive alone," Leonardo admitted quietly. "So I made you untouchable before they could move first." Claire's voice softened. "By declaring me yours." A painful shadow crossed his face. "I thought fear was the only thing powerful enough to protect anyone." But he had been wrong. Fear protected bodies, not souls. And somewhere between the violence and survival, Claire stopped belonging to anyone except herself again. That realization changed everything between them afterward. Their relationship no longer revolved around protection, manipulation, or emotional control. Choice replaced all of it. Claire stayed because she wanted to. Leonardo loved her carefully enough to let her leave if she ever chose differently. And strangely, that freedom made trust possible for the first time. Several months later, after the final federal indictments were announced publicly, Claire invited only a handful of surviving allies to a private ceremony along the coast. No press attended, no politicians, no criminal empires hiding behind expensive suits. Just ocean wind, quiet sunlight, and two emotionally scarred people choosing honesty over survival instincts. There were no contracts, no declarations of ownership, no strategic alliances disguised as affection. Only a simple exchange of vows spoken privately beneath open sky. Claire wore no diamonds connected to blood money. Leonardo carried no weapons. The symbolism mattered more than luxury ever could. The man who once started a war by declaring hers ultimately destroyed the war itself, so she could finally belong only to herself. That was the closest thing either of them would ever call redemption. For the first time in years, Peace finally felt possible until the package arrived. It appeared late one rainy evening, nearly 3 weeks after the ceremony. No return address, no fingerprints, only a plain black envelope delivered directly through federal-secured screening systems, somehow without detection. Claire immediately felt unease returning. Leonardo opened the package carefully while Marcus secured the house automatically. Inside rested a single flash drive. Nothing else. No message. No explanation. Leonardo connected it cautiously to an isolated laptop, while Claire stood beside him silently. Security footage appeared on the screen moments later. Time-stamped the night of the gala attack. Unreleased surveillance angles from inside the ballroom. The footage showed the exact moment Leonardo publicly placed his hand around Claire's waist before the shooting began. Then chaos erupted. Guests screamed. Gunfire exploded. Security teams moved violently. But suddenly Claire noticed movement near the rear emergency exit. A woman stepping briefly into camera range. Alive, watching the attack unfold calmly before disappearing again. Claire's breathing stopped instantly because both of them recognized her immediately. Isabella Moretti, the woman everyone believed died years ago.